לא שמעתי אמצעי עזר.
מיכאל, אני עושה לו אספרסו כפול, לעשות גם לך?
לאחרונה, אני אשמח.
מי שמעת רואה איתך?
מיכאל זה מישהו שאני צריך להכיר בגילי.
מיכאל בית,
בטח, לא.
בואו ניקח אתכם כבר לעבודת הקפה. יש לי חוות קפה.
רק שנייה אחת, אני בודק קודם כל שהמצגת שלי... איפה המעבדת קפה שלך מתחת מלכה? איפה שהמשרד שלך?
לא המשרד.
בוא חכה עוד דקה אחת, אל תהיה נודניק.
הנה, גם בא עודד לשמור לך על המחשב.
לא, אני באתי להתנצל שאני לא יכול להגיע להרצאה.
כל הדרך עשיתי לדבר איתך,
אני אשמח לשמוע אותה בהזדמנות אחרת, ממש חבל לי. יש לי את הבורד השנתי של המכון הלימודים מתקדמים. כן, עכשיו. יאללה, להתראות.
בקיצור, אני אשמח לתת לך את ההרצאה הזאת, אבל אפשר לקרוא להרצאת ספקות.
עכשיו הוא שינה את הטייטל. עוד אותו ברכיים, הוא משנה את הטייטל. זה יעקב.
רוני, מה שלומך?
בסדר.
יעקב.
אל תקרא לו יעקי, כי הוא לא אוהב.
יעקב.
רק שנייה. אני רק בודק שהכל ישנו.
באופן סדרתי.
אני בא.
רוני, לא אמרת אם אתה רוצה לפגוש מישהו מיוחד, אבל אני מאמין שפגשת את רמות.
אבל אני רוצה להיות, אני לא בטוח אני לא רואה את הדיסק. עזוב, אני מכיר את הדברים האלה. שנייה אחת. החיים שלי קשים.
בחדר הסמוך מתאים את המצגת שלי, יש לי שיעור ב-11, מיד אחריך.
אני לא בטוח. לא מסתדר. זה
קודם כל זה לא נראה שזה דבר.
אני צריך שזה... לא הצלחתי לשמור את זה.
איפה המצגת שלך?
הייתה כאן, שנייה אחת. נעשה את זה עוד פעם. נפתח. My presentation. אני כמעט לא אשתמש במצגת, אני בעיקר אדבר. עכשיו אתה תהיה נחמד אליי, אם אתה תראה, אם אתה רואה שאין כאן אף אחד באמת, שאני סתם מדבר אנגלית, תגיד לי, תעשה סריקה מיד, אתה רוצה שאני אתפגש גם עם עמוד?
אתה יכול לשאול בהתחלת ה...
יותר נחמד אם אני...
השאלה הנכונה הזאת זה יותר נכון אם אין מישהו שמדבר עברית.
אני רוצה לשמור את זה.
אתה יכול לבקש מהמון.
למה הוא לא עושה לי את זה? הוא לא מצליח לשמור לי את זה על זה. הוא לא מצליח לשמור את זה על זה. קיצור. יש...
יש דיסקונט.
דיסקונט יש לי תקוע במחשב, אבל אני חדר ביחד.
טוב, ננסה לעשות.
לא, מה נעשה? איפה זה?
הוא לא מצליח לשמור לי את זה. לקחתי את זה מאשתי.
מה זאת אומרת?
אבל אין לי את זה בדיסק-אוקים.
איפה זה מתחבר, תגיד?
מתחבר כאן, בוא ננסה. יש לי שניים. בוא ננסה כאן. אני פותח את הדבר הזה. זה סייב. זה ב-D, נכון? הגיוני. וכאן אני אעשה לו סייב, נראה מה יצליח. You can save to D. Please choose another location.
בוקר אור. הכי מוקדם שאפשר מבחינתי. בסדר גמור. אז קבענו. שלום. בסדר תוציא את זה רגע.
לא, זה עכבר שלי.
כן, יכול לצאת.
בדרך כלל זה עובד. אם זה לא יעבוד עכשיו, הנה, יפה מאוד.
איפה המצגת שלך?
המצגת כאן על המחשב. בסדר? לזה לדין, נכון? הגיוני? זה זה? כן, וגם תיגר? על המחלומר? זה נראה שזה שמור, נכון?
זהו, אפשר להציג?
כן. אני אשים את זה שם.
אתה רוצה, אני אביא לך כזה או שיש לך כזה להעביר את ה...
אין לי כלום. אני גם לא משתמש בזה מעט מאוד בכל
הטכנולוגיה.
כן, זה בעיקר דיבורית. אני היסטוריון, זה מילים. מילים.
אני נותן לך את זה, אני נותן לך את זה. צריך למחוק אבל את זה, רק רגע.
אהבתי שלא...
עם זה אתה מעביר. וזה אם אתה רוצה להשתמש בלייזר. זה לא H2 בערך.
ונראה את זה ביחד את
היום האורח שלנו זה פרופסור ילנבלום, והוא ידבר איתנו על שנה ללא גשם, כנראה שזה קשור גם לאקלים. זה לא קיץ, סליחה. ונראה מה יהיה לאנשים פה להגיד על זה. נכון. Today our speaker is Professor Ron is going to talk about the year without a summer, and we'll see what people will have to say about it.
You can leave it. You can leave the light on.
They will not see the...
Don't worry. It's better for them not to see. First, I have to apologize. I was an neuroscientist. My first seminar ever was 45 years ago or so, here in this room, about what can be learned from the curve of foraminifer, of plankton, about the temperature of the sea, but it was long ago. I'm not a scientist anymore. I am a scientist, but I'm not experimental scientist anymore. And I came here to raise doubts, to think differently. I'm not going to add new data. I'm not going to check specifically all data, but to try to think about what we are all doing in a kind of a distance, from a different resolution. As I told you, I was trained as an experimental geologist and a scientist like many of you. And I moved to the other campus, becoming someone who trained with Latin and Arabic and texts. And somehow I came back to the study of climate change, which is actually an historical subject. Because whatever you say about climate, you compare it to the past. And when comparing it to the past, you need to rely on historical data. And until about a decade ago, historians were not involved in the discourse of climate change, but in the last 10 years, so it became very popular. Many historians adopted, during the last decade, one of the theories concerning climate change. And this, I will speak only about this theory, which is a small part, but it can teach us a lot. We call it VCC, Volcanism and Climate Change. Many historians in the last decade adopted this theory, and according to this theory, a very strong volcanic eruption, past volcanic eruptions, caused very strong cold anomalies that happened to be approximately at the same time of the eruptions themselves. The eruptions can explain the eruptions and the cold anomalies, usually cold anomalies. The cold anomalies can explain the structural changes that happen in very complex societies. We just read, we can see I just brought a selection. Islands, doomsday scenario, Icelandic volcano cause historic famine in Egypt. Study shows volcanoes and the climate forcing of Carolingian Europe, AD 750, 950. This study was published in one of the most prestigious journals of historical sciences, of medieval sciences. It was written by Michael McCormick, dear friend of mine, who was here several times. Having barbecue in my own place, we all know him, and Paul Majewski, and it is considered to be, it's Speculum 2007, the first article starting the new fashion of collaboration between historians and scientists. Just I brought Andrew Majewski and Frank White wrote the Ice Chronicles. They are digging, they are ice core scientists. You can see them heroically presenting themselves Antarctica. On the other hand, my friend Mike McCormick, historian like myself. It's a collaboration. It's a win-win collaboration. You can see it all over the place. Science, nature, even PNAS, you name it. Everything that all of us want, all journalists, all of us want to publish our articles in very, very prestigious. And after apologies, I'm going to be very provocative, trying to claim that all of this is not supported by anything. It is just a fashion. A very strong fashion. I would like to ask several. I'm not doubting the idea that that there are volcanic eruptions. There were strong volcanic eruptions in the past. That some of the volcanic eruptions might coincide with something that happened to complex societies, but I would like to raise doubts about the connection between the two and about the supporting the fact that we historians are supporting it, and it doesn't. Cooling and societal change during the late Antique Little Ice Age from 536 around 660 AD, Nature Geoscience. In this article, they explain all the major changes in the Middle Ages by ashes and concentration of sulfur found in Greenland, Iceland, or elsewhere. I would like to raise out. Okay? I hope you are not furious on me already, not all of you. I just want to raise doubts about it. Something that we just read last week. Why 536 was the worst year to be alive, and everything is worse than the Black Death. And it's all because of volcano, probably in Iceland. We are not sure yet. And you can see the nice tables they created. Icelandic volcano erupts, dim the sun for 18 months, and then all the rest. Before continuing, it is just about. I would like to before continuing to tell something about this year without summer. In 1815, there was a strong volcanic eruption in Indonesia. In Tambora. An article published in 1981 described this eruption and the climatic events that followed as a year without summer. Here you can see, for the younger generation, the importance of PR. How to give a very sexy name to your article, because the idea of a year without summer became a proverb. I mean, everyone is using it. There is no way to argue with it. There was a year without summer. I will return to it later, because it was checked. What happened before, what happened later. But meanwhile, everything that happened in 1816 is the result of Tambora. It is so ridiculous that I wanted, in the summer of 1816, inclement weather kept young Mary Shelley and her friends indoors in Geneva, were desperate for something to do. They wrote stories. One should read the biography of this lady, of the loss of two children, of being expelled from a house in England, of being a desperate life. But it was Tambora and a year without winter. What I'm trying to say is that sometimes when you take experimental fact, your point of view of history and culture might be a bit reductionist. Okay? To blame Tambora with the writing of Frankenstein in Geneva in 1860, you need a bit more than a coincidence of time. Now, there is a cooperation. The cooperation between earth scientists, climate scientists, and historians is not trivial. We are speaking different languages. Historians cannot, most of the historians, including myself, I cannot read the models developed by climatologists. I will say a word about, don't worry, I will say a word about it too. We don't read the languages, and probably most of the people here, the Latin is not, I mean, or even other, or Greek, we don't speak the same languages. And the cooperation between the two communities of experimental scientists and community of historians is not trivial, because there is a big epistemological difference between the way historians are referring to something and the language they are using, and the way experimentalists are referring to a question. Even if we refer to climate issue, we don't refer to the same, we don't use the same way of argumentation, the same sequence, the same resolution. Something which is very good for a scientist is not good for a historian. When you say that something happened within an uncertainty of plus minus 30 years, for historians it is ridiculous. World War II was in 1950 plus minus 30 years. The State of Israel was established in 1950 plus minus 50 years. It is ridiculous for historians. You don't use the same resolution. We don't ask the same questions. And things that for experimentalists are questions and valid answers are not good for historians as questions. If you find that there was a volcano that erupted exactly in a certain year, this is a good question and a good answer if you can prove it, if you can really prove it. For historians, it's just the beginning of the world. For example, I taught with one of you, with a professor in our course on the earthquakes and this. We taught together the terrible earthquake of the All Saints' Day, end of October 1755 in Lisbon. Amot was interested to understand what caused, as a scientist, not as an intellectual, as a scientist, as an experimental scientist, what was the cause of the earthquake that destroyed Lisbon in 1755? What movement, where was it, what was the cause of the tsunami, etc., etc. For an historian, it is just the beginning of the argument between Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Voltaire and Leibniz and the idea of God, in the 18th century. In the 18th century. I mean, the physical reason that can be a question, a valid question and an answer for an experimental scientist is just the beginning. If I generalize and make it and reduce it, you are interested in the event. We are interested in the process that started with the societal process that started with the event. What happened? What people thought about it. So, and we are dealing with the same idea, the same. We are dealing with the same earthquake, but it is not the same. It is the same earthquake, but it is absolutely not the same. Absolutely not the same question, not the same answer, and not the same epistemological background. So the connection, the writing together of a paper between two totally separated epistemological communities, the experimental one and the historical one, entails that certain rules are to be kept. One has to speak the language of the other or accept things that he cannot decipher. And that's the reason of my seminar here. Because if Mike McCormick or anyone else, all my friends in the East Coast who are working together with experimental scientists about volcanoes and social changes, they have to accept, as a precondition, they have to accept the idea that, yes, volcanic eruptions are strong enough to cause such a cooling that will affect society. Am I clear so far? I mean there is one community of knowledge, one epistemological approach to the question which has to be dominant, and one that provides, yes, you know, at about the same time there was a big problem, a big social problem, and yes, it is probably because of the volcano. But the critical question, which is the essence of science, of my science and yours, the asking, is it indeed true? Is it, yeah. The very question, is it true? I mean, maybe I might be wrong. I think it's nonsense. But I might be wrong. But this is the essence of science. Not to add another example of 422, there was a volcanic eruption that we detected in Antarctica or in Greenland or in the Alps or wherever, and there was a social problem elsewhere, and they're probably connected together. Read article, IES, promotion, salary, position, whatever. I mean, and that's why I came here. Well, I'm already a professor, so even if you criticize me, nobody can take what I have. I'm not but I think it is critical. And what I did in the last 2 or 3 months, and I will just tell it as a story. I asked myself, how it all began. I reached the conclusion that I will share with you soon, that it is not substantial. I mean, there were about 70 eruptions in the last 200 years. 6 of them, one of them can go 7. There are models that are being improved all the time, explaining things and their opposites at the same time, including things that are indeed, I will speak about it. And then I try to do what I'm doing usually, and trying to follow the historiography of these ideas. But before I speak about the historiography of the VCC of the volcanism and climate change, I will claim that so far in the last 200 years, we have some, I would say, one strong evidence in Pinatubo that volcanism affected the climate during this period. I mean, there was a reduction of half centigrade for the next 15 months. If it is the result only of Pinatubo or not, it is still debated, but whatever you look at it, and it was an eruption of 6 VI, and it is not something that affects societies almost in any way. We don't have any real evidence. We have model, calculated evidence. But historians who accepted the theory, wherever there is a societal transformation, they are looking for the eruption. And wherever there is eruption, they are looking. No, they don't do those. If there is a societal transformation, they look for the event. And the finding of the event is the answer to the question. How far was the event? How strong was the event? It surely had to be more than 6. But where, when, how? How do you know? How do you know the dating so clearly? Are you sure? Can anyone be so sure as telling that a certain eruption was in 536? We don't have such an evidence in hand. But because of many reasons, our predictions about the past are different from our predictions from the present or the future. About the past, more and more articles are published that a certain event affected complex societies. For the present, we are very reluctant to accept it. That climate can change, that what we see now is the result of climate. Usually we blame ourselves. Historians and experimentalists, we cannot manage the resources in people of time. For the future, the kind of God creating a stone that only we can raise it up or not. We'll see. We have 3 types of explanations. Now let's see the historiography of the idea. The idea of the VCC was raised by geologists. You all studied it in historical geology. I studied it in historical geology almost 45 years ago in a course here given by Rafi Freund, by the late Rafi Freund, the discovery of the Ice Age. Discovery of the Ice Age, the word Ice Age was invented by Agassi in 1837, and but by the end of the 19th century, people were looking for reasons that can cause such a cooling of the earth. And there were many explanations. I don't want to enter into it, but one of the explanations was that major volcanic eruptions might lead to such cooling, either by spreading of dust or by spreading the thing. Or by spreading water and so on and so forth. It was invented in the 1890s. It was almost totally abandoned during the first half of the 20th century. It still existed. People were, I think I read all of them. And it came to life again in the mid 1950s. The idea is that volcanoes can affect climate in such a way to cause the collapse of societies. And the reason it can even be dated. It can be dated to 1954, to April 1954, to Operation Ivy in Bikini Atoll in Oceania. It was the first big H-bomb test made by the Americans so close to Japan. And by the end of this year, the head of climatological service of Tokyo published an article condemning the abominable test of the Americans so close to, and he said that the cold winter in northern Japan in the same year and the very poor harvests in Japan in the same year are the result of the bomb. And he said the winter was as cold as the winter after the eruption of Krakatoa. Krakatoa is the second major eruption of the 19th century. It is well documented. Following the eruption of Krakatoa in 1883, there were two major expeditions to see what were the results of Krakatoa. One was Dutch, the second was British. They published the results and the finding extensively. And you know, as geologists, you know how important, how important were the big expeditions of the 19th century. I think about Darwin, I think about Robert Mallet in Basilicata, inventing seismology and other. Many scientists coming to a place, collecting all the material, publishing it very extensively. They both wrote about almost everything. Just one thing was missing. Relative base. Nobody mentioned any change in the temperature. Anywhere around Krakatoa. But it became, for reasons there was no mention of we can reconstruct. We can say that there was a we know now. There was a reduction of the temperature 4 years after that. And you have to have a very complex model in your mind to explain something that happened 4 years after the and people are using it. And the Japanese said the winter was the worst since 1984. Okay? Which is not true. The fear of volcanic, the fear of atomic winter was the fear of volcanic. And then they did. There was Tambora, Krakatoa, and there was this fissure that is the most interesting of all. This is a lucky fissure in Iceland. I don't know how many of you know it, but the historiography it erupted in a terrible eruption in 1783. In 1783. The eruption was disastrous because it was full of gases, and half of the 1/4 of the population and the herd of Iceland died of the gases. And the same year, a great American scholar that you see here, Benjamin Franklin, was sitting in Paris, and it was very, very cold this year, and there was kind of mist in the air, and he said this mist and this cold can be explained only by volcano or by extraterrestrial object that enter the. And in retrospect, he is considered the visionary, the first man to invent the idea of volcanism in climate change. He was smart enough to understand that there is a volcanic eruption, and the volcanic eruption is lucky, this fissure. No matter that since the 50s we are talking about sulfur in the stratosphere. We are not talking, and there is no way that that was the geology that I studied, that a fissure in Iceland will bring such a big amount of sulfur in eruption in Pinatubo or Krakatoa or Tambora, like eruptions to the stratosphere. I mean, mid-ocean ridge, after all. It's not something, there's a big amount of gases, but the effect on the stratosphere, the immediate effect can be doubted. But when you are so eager to test it, so there are several non-experimental scientists that studied both Tambora. Last summer we heard that it was the result of is the cause for the results of the battle in Waterloo that happened the year before Tambora, that lucky changed the climate in the entire world, and the same is true with Krakatoa and other. People were studying the temperature in various places before the eruptions. The cold in the 18th century began before 1780s, before the eruptions. And the same is true for Tambora. Tambora erupted in 1815. Georgina Enfield of Liverpool studied, and she saw it was a Nilo. There were cold spells, there were all kinds of climatic turbulence before the eruptions. If at all, Tambora was less disastrous than the previous year. Agung, same thing. The winter of 1963 was the worst ever, the worst since the Little Ice Age in London. In 1963, the Thames was totally frozen before the eruption. The eruption, well, Agung was 5. It was not supposed to, but it is included in all the discussions. So what I'm trying to say, there was something that was invented in the 19th century to explain the Ice Age. It was abandoned. It returned to the center of scientific thinking in the mid 1850s because of several reasons. For the discovery, because of our better understanding of stratosphere, because of the creation of complex model that connect the calculated amount of sulfur in the stratosphere to the cooling of the Earth and the length of it. This idea gained force in the beginning of the 1960s. How much longer do I have, or did I pass my?
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
5 minutes.
It became popular again in the beginning of the 60s. It became popular again in the beginning of the 60s, when the data and what I studied already here in this class in the beginning of the 70s, the atmosphere was cooling, and people were looking for explanations to explain why is the cooling. And there was a suggestion by a great climatologist who became a Fourier later because he was against the CO2 theories, Ray Bryson of Wisconsin. And he was flying over India and he saw the dust, and he said, and he was the first to raise the idea that enough amount of dust can lead to the cooling, of the atmosphere, and this was a popular. And there was articles that are still quoted that show how much dust in the atmosphere can lead to the cooling. It's probably the greatest article that Huber or Horatio Lamb wrote about climate change is the way of calculations. So, what I'm trying to say, raise doubts before we accept the theory. It was raised for one reason, was rejected, was raised again by fear, changed the entire justification by Jung already in the first half of the 1950s, returned in the 60s because of the dust in the atmosphere, and reached historians and scientists and the best publication. I think before adding that data, we should always, I know that some of you are doing it, just check how did we reach conclusions that we take as a given fact. I think that we have to be very cautious before we declare that experimentally. I know that each of my arguments, I create another enemy here, but we should be very cautious before declaring that we can experimentally date annually something, never mind if it's in the we should be cautious. If you don't have historical documents, it is very, very, very difficult, if not impossible, to date anything annually. That coincidence is not explanation. That when you create an interdisciplinary study, you have to think a bit more about the different epistemologies and how to combine them. And I can go on and on forever, but I'm ready for that. There is one thing. One picture I want to show you. I didn't show many. This is the Krakatau. These are pictures that you can find. You can find in the web. There are illustrations of the British scientists who drove all the sunsets in the year after Krakatoa, because of a beautiful sunset, because of the dust in the atmosphere, and that's again the idea that the dust can create such a climate change. This is a picture taken from their own report, but I just to finish with humoristic, as I started. As I started with Mary Shelley, I would like to end with Edvard Munch and the Cry, which was painted in 1893, 10 years after Krakatoa, and 7 years after and wherever you look for Krakatoa, you will see this drawing of Munch and his plate of colors that those who include them believe that they were the result of his own experience of Krakatoa. I just gave. This is a picture from an exhibition of Edvard Munch. If he was influenced in such a way in his Cry, he was influenced throughout his career, before Krakatoa and after. But it was just you know what it's going to be. That's it. I'm ready to answer questions.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much. I have a question. People that argue for a connection between catastrophic natural events and changes in the society, they base their arguments on some kind of correlations that they show. I understand your doubts, okay? But you did not show any data sets that show the opposite. So what your doubt is based on?
Maybe you should add, it's easy to doubt your doubts. I think Jacob is saying that it's easy to doubt your doubts.
I do believe that nature affects societies. Personally, I think that we have very strong evidence that short-term, that's my idea, it's a different I think that short-term dramatic events tell about a decade or two of scarcity of water, which means scarcity of food. It can be caused by rising temperature, but I think a drought of 10, 20 years affects societies, that nature affects societies through the availability of food. It might be, I don't know what the reason of this short-term climatic disturbances that affect society. It might be volcanoes, it might be sunspots, it might be anything else. But I think that moving from the process, from historians to finding, we found the reason why, to what? How long does it take? How can we prove it? We are trying to connect things that are not connected. There is one thing, it's what happens to societies. There is one thing.
That's fine, but it's correlated, so they try to explain it somehow.
Correlation is not causation.
Any other questions? Yes.
Let me take you back to 2nd century BCE, 142-3 earthquake. The earthquake that we fought over so long, this first earthquake of Ateret that we think we might end the year. And if you take from there, for 900 years, the 6 major earthquakes that hit our region fell on wars, on political events, on political transition. I think we can argue about the details, but I think the lesson is that when the society is in instability, natural cause can be a trigger. This is something to consider in the argument.
It is always, if you do extrapolation, you have to take all the data, not only the data you choose. Even about volcanoes. So many volcanoes did not cause any events. So many events were not related to volcanoes. And there were political events that were not related to earthquakes. Personally, I don't see the causal chain connecting between the earthquake, and there was an earthquake, we all agree, which is dated by very strong, by texts. We found coins are texts. We found the text, and the earthquake is dated by text. We know exactly which year, we know from other texts what happened approximately, but to connect things, people asking me, how do you explain that Jewish people are so smart? I say who? Who checked all the Jewish people and creating, you choose a group of Jewish people that you know, and you say they are smart, all are smart. No. I know some who are not so smart.
יש פה מישהו שהוא בעל רמה כתומה?
כן.
אז אוקיי, רוני, תודה רבה.
Thank you.